Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Balie. My name is Iante Mosselman. I'm a program editor here. And this afternoon, I will be speaking with the former director of the Slovak National Theatre, Matej Drlička.
Hello.
I tried really hard on my pronunciation. And with Milo Rau, who is the artistic director of the Wiener Festwochen. And later on also with Teresa Koen, who is professor of modern European history and politics at the University of Amsterdam. We will speak for about an hour and 15 minutes maybe. Then I will also come towards you and you can ask a question, but please wait till I come towards you with the microphone because we have a live stream. And this is also a gentle reminder that we have a live stream so that if you ask a question, that question will be visible on the internet for eternity. Starting with that light note, welcome to you both. I'm really, really happy that you could join here when it's both really busy, and it's also, there's terrible floods happening in Bratislava and Vienna at the moment. So I appreciate it. And Matej, I'm gonna start with you. I announced it in my little opening notes that you are the former director of the Slovak National Theatre. One day in August, you suddenly got fired. Why?
It's a simple and difficult question at the same time. I got fired because I have different vision of the world than our Minister of Culture. It's the simple and true answer. And if you want later, we can dig in deeper into what is her vision. But there is a huge gap between the philosophy of Slovak Nationalist Party, which she represents, and the vision of me personally and the theater.
And it's, if I would say it, it's a conservative vision against a progressive vision?
It's worse than that, or different, very different. It's very important to know that our Minister of Culture, Martina Šimkovičová, before she became the Minister of Culture, she used to be a TV presenter on a private Slovak television, where she was fired because of racist statements. Then she established her own online program called TV Slovan, where she, especially during COVID, she was very successful with heavy disinformation programs, going from extraterrestrials to traditional culture. And thanks to this channel, she became very popular by at the disinformation scene. And thanks to this, she got into politics. And of course, as soon as we learned that the name of our Minister of Culture is Martina Šimkovičová, that was spreading the craziest disinformation topics, we knew that it wouldn't be good, and it's not good.
And so you knew the moment she was appointed that you were going to get fired?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, but I knew that my stay at the theater would be shorter than we thought originally.
Yeah. You told me last night that there was a moment where you said something and you knew that's going to be the trigger. Can you take me back to that moment?
Well, yeah. Basically, there are 30 institutions that are governed by the Ministry of Culture, from libraries to National Theatre. And the moment she became Minister of Culture, we all knew that something new was going to happen, a new reality for us. And auto-censure, we say in English, auto-censure came into place. We realized that if we comment on her public statements, we would definitely enter very quickly into a war with the ministry. So we were sort of holding back. We were discussing with the colleagues because she started immediately. She became minister. She started with public speeches, and they were either funny or very, very stupid. And we were all holding back, saying we should not comment on this. Let's see. Maybe she gets better. Maybe she calms down. And then there was one moment in January where she had a speech against the LGBT community in Slovakia, and I was asked by the media what I think about it. So that was the first moment where I stood behind them, and I told very clearly that it's unacceptable and it's very dangerous for the society. So that was I immediately got information from the political circles that you should have not said that because now she's very angry with you. And then there was this TV ceremony, like a prize giving called the Crystal Wing. And I was giving a prize, and there I had a speech where I told very clearly that we see that a new ideology is taking place and it's very dangerous and we are not okay with it. And then I got more and more information that I was getting the messages that I go, as we say, I go down very, very soon. Long story short, I was receiving messages. I was talking to people that were warning me, but there was no way to escape this. So the 6th of August, the doorbell rang, and I opened the door and I got the dismissal.
And it was a Sunday morning.
It was a Monday morning.
Monday morning.
I was on a sick leave.
Yeah.
In my bathrobe, so the bathrobe became a legendary icon now. People were protesting in bathrobes. So I was in my bathrobe, I opened the door, because my wife told me that there would be a courier coming, so I should definitely be ready to open the door. So I did, and I got the decree of my dismissal.
But it's such a sign of power, isn't it, to come to your front door, to come to your house?
It's legal.
It's legal.
That's their most often and most common response. It's legal.
So I was thinking about your situation and in the Netherlands, and I don't think here it would be possible if the Minister of Culture to fire a director of a theater. So how is this legally possible? How come it's not the institution is not completely independent of the ministry?
Yeah, the law permits her to do that. There is a special law that governs the Slovak National Theatre. Then there is another law that governs the galleries and museums. So different institutions are governed by different laws. But as far as the law of the Slovak National Theatre goes, it says that the minister names the general director and also dismisses the general director without giving any reasons. But before the naming of the general director, so to get the person in, there is a public hearing, like a 3-round public hearing that I went through, of course, that is streamed, that is public, and with a jury of experts. And the same way was also stipulated in the law for galleries and museums, and now they changed it. So one of the many things that they did in a few months is that they changed the law so that they can directly install a minister without any jury of experts, without any public hearing, and they can also fire the director. So they are making it easier, and they are making it purely political. And I'm sure it will also happen with the law for the Slovak National Theatre.
Did you meet your replacement yet?
Well, I didn't meet her since, but I know her, and yeah, I know her. But we didn't meet yet, but we will.
Milo, I was wondering, what did you think when you heard this, of this happening?
That's good, because now it's interesting to ask this question, because it seems very long ago already. It's crazy, no? Yeah. Because it's some weeks, or it's a month. Yeah. It's a month, but it seems to me that because since I feel an acceleration, of course, in Slovakia, but in the whole eastern part of Europe, as if there would be a kind of a click, and since then it goes very fast. I remember that at that moment, I was less used than perhaps you already to these Kafkian moments that this can happen. We were like in Vienna and in Germany, we were a bit like, oh wow, this happened. And then I was researching on this minister, and I saw exactly what you told us, that she made these statements and so on, and that there was this mix of dangerous and stupid and absurd, but that it really happened, you know. Because I remember many friends from Russia, sorry to make now this comparison, but they said to me it was so absurd in the beginning when the Putin regime started that they just didn't believe it. Yeah. And in the end, the democracy was gone. But it was too absurd. You would not believe it. And now, some weeks later, and I mean, as stupid you are, you become also kind of an icon immediately. And I think this kind of discourse in Slovakia is now copied in for example, Austria. So they really went one step. I don't know if there's a direct link. Of course, it's the sister party, the party of this minister, and the FPÖ, so the right-wing, the strong right-wing party in Austria. But it became kind of common to, for example, in the election program in Austria and FPÖ, and this is really new, they ask to stop the subsidies, and this is the election program. So what they will do when they take the power, and they will stop the subsidies for the European Song Contest and the Wiener Festwochen, so my festival. And because these are, I quote, woke events. And I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the Eurovision Song Contest or some moments, but it's, I mean, a super popular thing. So when and the same with the Wiener Festwochen, by the way, and the same with his theater. So for a certain time, they used economical argumentation. They said we don't pay for the elite and for the LGBTQ, and they make it for like 20 people, and why would we invest? It's not. And now they attack even the popular culture, even the bourgeois culture, even, I mean, festivals and theaters that are doing classics. I mean, we make avant-garde, but we also make kind of a broad tableau of culture. So when this came, I somehow knew, and that's why I called you, I think, immediately in the afternoon. I knew that perhaps now we have to act, or it will be very fast too late.
What I really found very shocking is that this minister is a party of the Slovak National Party, and they only got 5% of the votes. And the Smer, the other party that's in the government with her, also it's not nearly a majority. So how come they can, as you say, also you would think with the cutting of things that are very popular, how can that happen? Because it seems such a impossible thing, except for the fact that it's not.
Yes, at the elections, the Slovak Nationalist Party, they got 5.6%, enough to get in. You need 5% to get in. I don't know how it's here. And now, after the last countings, now they would get 3.6 or 3.4 even. So they are losing. But still, the main two parties in the coalition is Smer of Fico and Hlas, that was created by the current president, Mr. Pellegrini. And these two, they need the third party to get the votes done at the parliament. So basically, a little tiny party is controlling the government, controlling the parliament. And I'm not an expert on politics. We will hear Nankun, but what we hear most often, and which sounds very logical, is that there are many things happening in Slovak politics. On many things, the European Commission is commenting, and what's happening in the culture is creating this smoke wall that covers all the rest, basically. All the attention of the public is now focused on what's happening in culture. There's this division of exactly the elites, the actors from the National Theatre who get crazy money for doing nothing, and the traditional culture is dying, which is a total lie, of course. And through this smoke, we don't see the reality. We don't see that our country is falling apart. So I think even with those few percents that they have, they are doing their job. And they do it very well, unfortunately.
I can see that it brings them a lot by creating this distance between the elites and the people, and to create sort of two different groups. But then I was wondering about the culture. What do they want with it? What sort of culture do they want then?
Please go.
I mean, perhaps there's one comment I would love to make on what you said. I remember when I was in Russia doing a project called the Moscow Trials, and then they sent Pussy Riot into the camps.
Yeah.
And this was also the moment when we understood it's not about Pussy Riot, and it's because it's a group of 4 people at that time. Now there are more. But it's about showing that now they start to do it. And they go together with the church and they create what you could call a kind of a state-financed popular culture, pseudo-traditionalistic and so on. And that's what happened in Russia. What's concerning Vienna or Austria, these parties are much bigger. So the FPÖ has 30%, or what is expected, a bit more. They will go together with ÖVP. Perhaps I'm wrong, but that's what is expected. Then they will have 60%. And their program is very clear. And what is interesting until now, always the Minister of Culture was somebody from the ÖVP, but if then the Chancellor and the Minister of Culture will be from the FPÖ, from the extreme side, they will let them do, and also for reasons of making other stuff that is more important and interesting the media by these culture wars, you know. And I think that's what is happening. So what is expected and what is announced is exactly I mean, I just look into my future when I look to the 70 kilometers Bratislava away. So I don't think I have to explain what will happen with me and what will happen with other institutions and what will happen with. I'm even not talking about the independent sector. I mean, they are even not talking about the independent sector anymore because this is the neoliberal past that they were attacking the independent group. So this is even not interesting.
That's already gone.
That's gone.
Yeah.
And yes.
Many people are commenting on what's happening in Slovakia in comparison with what happened in Hungary with the Orban reform in the field of culture. Saying that basically now the Orban's government is controlling the freedom of culture. I'm not an expert on Hungarian culture politics, but I hear that from my friends who work in the field of culture in Hungary. And they say that it took around 6 years to Orban to come to this point when the culture is obedient. And the independent culture has tough times to get the financing and is basically fighting for the freedom. And obviously they did it well. Don't take me literally, but like they did a good job in the way that they installed the rules that are very strict, and they basically made it impossible for free theater work or free culture. In Slovakia, Šimkovičová, she's trying to do it in 1 year. And the reason why I'm optimist and I keep smiling is because there is a big difference between the people that Orban hired and Šimkovičová, because she is completely incapable. Like, she understands nothing. And it's very interesting what's happening at the ministry. We speak a lot about Šimkovičová, but the main guy behind is Machala, who is basically the general manager of the ministry. So it's the guy who is supposed to make the ministry run in terms of functioning of the institution, but he's the main ideologist. And he's not hiding it. He was also often as a guest in her TV Slovan, speaking about extraterrestrials hiding on the dark side of the moon. Chemtrails, it's nothing. Like, they go much farther, and this guy is now the main ideologist of the Slovak Ministry of Culture. But they are both incompetent. They both have no idea how to operate. They have no management skills. So basically, if their goal was to transform the culture of the country, if they set a certain goal, they will never achieve it because they are just incapable. They are like clumsy little kids that want to make something out of Lego, but they just can't do it, and it keeps falling apart. I don't want to go in too much details, but everything they touch, they break it, and it's just not functioning. And I think this is, I mean, it's terrible, and I think very soon we will be just looking at the culture sector with a lot of fire and smoke because nothing will be functioning, but they will not transform it. It's absolutely sure that they have no intellectual management capacities to make the reform. And tomorrow we have a press conference if the floods will not be too heavy, and we will show a scheme. It's not official yet. We will show it tomorrow, of the idea of Mr. Machala, how he envisions the sector of culture. He played around like with cards, like he rearranged the functioning of the institutions. Is absolutely beyond any realistic possibility of doing it. So we will show to the public, like, if you think that it will end with dismissal of myself and Alexandra Kusá, you are far from the truth. He will continue and he will demolish everything on his way. And his idea of how the culture should be organized is so, it's just psychopathic. And they will not achieve. So in their incompetence, I see the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's quite a sad light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
I'm going to ask Teresa Kuhn to join us on stage. very warm welcome to you as well. Professor Modern European History and Politics at the University of Amsterdam. I was maybe to start with, how did you listen to this conversation? Because you studied this in all of Europe.
Yeah, it is of course really frightening and confronting to hear it firsthand from people who have experienced this. At the same time, I agree with Milo when he says, yeah, when we look at Slovakia, we see the future, because of course now also looking at what is happening in the Netherlands, we see some tendencies moving towards more censorship and silencing oppositions. So I think it is unfortunately a general trend that we see across Europe.
I'm going to ask you to put the microphone a bit more closely. Yeah, that's perfect, I think.
More close? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. And you started also by saying what we see here, and that war on culture is so. But I wanted to ask you, what are the main differences I think you see in maybe what is happening here and former countries that were Soviet countries?
Yeah, I think one big difference is, of course, the length of democracy. So Slovakia is just a relatively new democracy in that respect. And so because of that, they might not yet have consolidated all the institutions and also the values, democratic values in people's brains as much as in other countries. I think that is one of the big differences, and also the fact that what we see in Slovakia is maybe just a couple of steps ahead. At the same time, I think we should really not be complacent. So there is always this idea, okay, Western Europe, these are consolidated democracies, it's not going to happen here again, but yeah, the steps are very often quite small and maybe not to be seen. And similarly to what you said, I think people often don't want to see it because they don't want to confront the reality that maybe also in the Netherlands or in other countries, democracy is under threat and is under attack from certain members of the political spectrum.
Milo, I see you nodding. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, what I was just reflecting on when we have Slovakia and Netherlands, what is Austria? So
yeah.
I was reflecting on that, and there's a quite funny saying about Austrians by Karl Kraus, an Austrian poet. I think I quoted it before, that the Austrians are the only people that become more stupid with experience. And I think exactly the fact that, for example, the Austrian democracy and the German democracy kind of created fascism somehow some years ago kind of gives the impression to these people that it will never happen again, because it's impossible, and they are all anti-fascists and they are Democrats. And when I was in a talk show, we talked about it too, from a right-wing TV station called Servus TV, and I was attacked from everybody, because everybody was conservative besides me, that I am elitist, anti-democrat and a fascist. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to kind of give or become aware of what is actually happening, because they think that they save democracy from the bad elites, and they have their own theories. And in the end, I came to you talked about what happens on the dark side of the moon, and this is kind of the theory of the puppet master and the cultural ministry, etc. But this is 50% of the Austrian, and I guess also of the Slovakian, and I don't know, in Netherlands, society. It's not that these are crazy 5% or this crazy presenter or the puppet master, or, I mean, it's really like. And when I was saying, but I don't believe that the Greens since 50 years planned all this, and this is the big transformation and the people exchange, etc., because I have a lot of, I don't know, experience in projects about migration, for example, and unfortunately I never saw a plan in it. I would love that there is a plan, but there is not. But they didn't listen, they don't believe it, they just... And it's so separated, but this is perhaps more on a meta-political level, that what we discuss here, perhaps they watch the live stream and they think, idiots.
Yeah.
They will disappear. Yeah.
What I found interesting, what we spoke about yesterday as well, is that you asked me also what is the sort of the big topic that drives people to extreme right, and I think to say in the Netherlands it's migration, but you said no, in Slovakia that's absent from the discourse, it's Russia.
Yeah, in Slovakia we have no immigrants. Basically, this is the fourth government of Fico, and one of the main points of his politics was no immigrants. So we have none, or you can count them on
one hand.
On two hands. And yes, their tool is Russia. Our government, when they are in the European Union premises, they speak about the support to Ukraine, and when they are at home, they speak about that we have to be friends with Russia. So there is this double face. And those people who vote for them, usually they don't follow the real news. They follow disinformation media, so they don't get the other view. And politicians are trying to convince Slovakia, the Slovak voters, that the only way of getting out of this situation in Ukraine is to make a deal with Putin. And personally, I don't want to get into this because I'm not a geopolitical expert, but it's quite crazy to see, even in my surrounding, that, I mean, I'm 48 and I experienced communism. I remember it. I remember stories of my parents, and it's very easy. There are hundreds of quality books speaking about the terror of communism in Czechoslovakia. We were speaking about '68 when the Russian tanks were in the center of Bratislava, and we sort of like total blank, like we pretend that it didn't happen, that in those few years Russia became a purely democratic country that would bring just freedom. And so this is the narrative: friendship with Russia, and sort of making it sound like it's the United States the aggressor in this. And of course, it's not black and white. There are many shades of gray. But I think the heaviest argument of those of the voters of Fico and Hlas and also Danko is that we want no war. So we will stick with this government because they will protect us from the war.
Teresa, it's all these different topics, but they do all drive people to the extreme right. And you also see that these parties really have found each other in Europe and in the parliament there. Also with the new party that Orban has founded. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, so we have seen in Europe and in the European Parliament that voters have shifted successively more to the right, and we currently have the most right-wing parliament at the European level. And what is happening right now is that we have actually three far-right party groups, and Orban is one of them that he created last summer. And it's actually quite interesting to see because on the one hand, they do agree on a lot of issues. But then on the other hand, there are some topics that they disagree with, and they also compete with each other. So you mentioned Putin and Ukraine. So this is still an issue where a lot of the far-right parties in Europe actually are quite opposed to each other. So we have, for example, Austria, which is the FPÖ in Austria, which is very much pro-Putin. But then we have other far-right parties, like in Poland, they're just very much against Putin. So, of course, because of that, they don't want to work with each other. So, in a way, Putin is helping the rest of the European Parliament to drive the far-right a bit away from each other. And that is, at the moment, I think, the only reason why people in Europe are not even more worried about the far right in the European Parliament, because if all these three parties were really, working together, then they would, of course, have a much bigger say. Then they might even be like the biggest party group in the European Parliament, bigger than, for example, now the European People's Party. Mm-hmm. And then politics would look a lot grimmer at the European level than it currently does. So we just have to hope that they keep fighting.
I hope I don't ask you to look into a glass ball, but I wonder, you say it would look a lot grimmer. What would be possible in terms of power?
Well, the Parliament co-decides on many decisions together with the European Council, and so they could, for example, they just a couple of months ago they had a big migration pact, and they could, for example, decide to open this pact again and to agree for a much stricter migration and asylum policy than what we currently have at the European level. That would be, for example, one of the big issues that we could expect. Another one is, of course, also the Green Deal. Mm-hmm. We see that many far-right parties are strongly opposed to the Green Deal. Right now, we still have a majority in favor, but if the Green parties work more together, if the far-right parties work more together, then also this would be much more being challenged than it currently is. So I think these are two big issues where the far-right could make a big difference at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. One of the things that you also said that we have to talk about, and this is also, I think, a question for all three of you, is that these countries are all in the European Union because they all said we'll share values, and we are also all in favor of this European constitution that we signed that is based on ideas like freedom and democracy and rule of law. So the question was that you also proposed that we talk about here is, how do you deal with countries who said they were for this European constitution and now act completely against it? So how do you deal? How can the EU deal, and how do you think we could deal with that?
Yeah, it's of course a huge problem, because when these countries joined in 2004 and 2007, they all had made huge efforts to become really democratic. So that was really one of the conditions for them to be even able to join the European Union. And the EU also presented itself like this big democratization machine, like, look at us, we made all these 10 countries become really democratic, we're great. And this worked for a while, but then once the countries were in the European Union, the EU did not have any kind of mechanism to stop them from democratic backsliding. And this has been a huge challenge for the EU for now more than a decade, and especially with respect to Viktor Orban. What we now see in the last 2-3 years is that they have found ways to limit the power. So, for example, by saying you only get money from us if you actually abide by democratic rules. So, for example, with the Corona funds, we have seen that. So, and we see that member states actually do react to that. And in the case of Orban, people are even considering to withdraw voting rights from Hungary in the European Council. But that's a very drastic step. We've had it in Austria 20 years ago, when FPÖ was for the first time in government, and Austria was not allowed to vote. And that had also, it really backfired as well, because then the Austrian population became really like, what are you doing to us? You're taking away our rights, and became even more Eurosceptic. So it's something that is dangerous, but at the same time, it seems that it might be the only way to save the EU from Orban, because he's really trying to destroy the EU as well.
Milo, what do you think, reflecting on this, what happened in Austria 20 years ago?
I mean, it connects two questions that are quite interesting. The power that the EU still has, like 20 years ago, to do what they did in that moment, because it somehow worked out, we have to say, and then we paid now the price since some years. And the other question, because the problem in 2001, I think that the ÖVP went together with the FPÖ, and this is the middle party. And the same question in Germany, of course, goes the CDU together with the AfD. It starts in parts of the country, and it already started in Austria. ÖVP is already in most of the countries together with the FPÖ. So what will the middle party do, the conservatives, concerning the extreme right wing? And this is the question that will be answered after 29 September in Austria. I don't think at all that the European Union will act again like they did 20 years ago, because it completely changed. Right-wing parties, they are called fascists, right-wing parties, we write letters, but the European Union somehow is defeated in this. And I think also, but I think that you can do this much, or explain it much better than me, if we are now entering a kind of a decay of the European Union, and that we will come to another model that is, I don't know how, kind of transnational, I don't know, building, but because, I mean, there's two problems. One problem is that the right wing and Orban don't want to have the European Union, and they're even making pacts. I mean, also the right wing in Germany, by the way, we didn't name them, but they are close to Putin too, which is completely absurd, because they also have their historical experiences. And the other question is if Europe can overcome it by becoming more democratic themselves, because this is I mean, when we look at the acts of the European Council, for example, in many cases, I mean, Greece is for me as a lefty a case that, let's say in the economical politics, that I would criticize too. So, I mean, what is the future of European austerity? What is this? And I think these questions have to be found even independently from the FPÖ or the Slovakian situation or Orban. And the biggest challenge is, and as I'm very often in Italy, is the migration pact, because of course Italy seems extremely lonely, like Greece, when it comes to migration, because of the Dublin treaties. And I think we have so many contradicting systems in Europe that I'm happy I'm not a political scientist, because I have absolutely no solution for it.
We're just analyzing, we're not offering solutions.
Maybe we'll get into that a bit more later on also in solutions, but I want to ask you both also to react on what Teresa said about this backgrading after joining the EU. And I was wondering, can you think back about how that process went? Can you sort of describe that for me, how that, because the FPÖ has been there for 20 years, but how did this process go in Slovakia?
I don't think we have enough time to describe what was happening during the years in Slovakia. I will begin from the end. 80% of our investments in the infrastructure comes from EU in Slovakia.
80%?
80%.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And still, the politicians are successful in convincing the public that EU is an enemy, that there is a dictate of EU, and that we are a free country and we will not accept the dictate. And it just comes back to this George Orwell novel of 1984, where freedom means slavery, right? And you are a fascist because you are a free director. And this is what they are doing. They are exactly the newspeak from this book. The newspeak is back. And it's just very difficult to believe it, but it's like that. European Union for us, when we entered, was a dream coming true, because we were running in that direction. We were not planning our holidays in Russia. We wanted to go to Italy, to France. I mean, we are not buying TVs from Russia, as we were discussing. We are buying them from the EU network. So it's just crazy how we get into this contradiction, this absurdity of completely erasing, deleting the goals we had a few years ago. And it's important to know that, like, Bratislava is a beautiful modern city. Like, people have everything. I mean, they drive in expensive cars. They have good jobs. I mean, we have Netflix, like everybody. But something like this was unimaginable for my parents. Like, we really came from minus to large plus. We've got materially, we have everything. And we have the freedom by becoming a member of European Union. And now we are accepting the narrative that the European Union is an enemy and is putting a dictate. So it's very hard to accept it. But again, it's not the whole country. I don't think it's even half of the country. It's much less than half of the country. And I try to remain very positive. But the truth is that even European Union inside is changing, which is not helping. That is for sure. But to end, being a member of EU made a tremendous positive changes upon our country. That is for sure.
Mm-hmm. Milo, in Austria, could you elaborate on that joining and then integrating?
I think that the situation is super different. I think in Austria, in the right-wing movement or in the right-wing conservative movement, you have a story that is still very much, or a rhetoric that is very much dictated in the last 80 years from how you would respond to the echoes of the Holocaust and the war and real fascism, because it was one of the two countries who really committed the genocide, Austria. And I mean by the population, by the soldiers, by the elites, the functional elites. And how did they react? So after the war, they created a party, and it was called Freedom Party, FPÖ. And it was the same people that were in the Nazi party. And then in the 80s with Haider, and even a bit before, they became liberal. And then they became neoliberal, and they became neoliberal, let's say, conservative and a bit populist. And the fun fact is that like 10 years ago, they started to reuse Nazi rhetorics, Nazi ideas, and Nazi, let's say, an election program. For example, a very known quote by Goebbels, very known in Austria, is Fortress Europe. And the election program of the Freedom Party, this is George Orwell too, yeah, is called Fortress Austria. And they quote fascist rhetorics. And when I was doing last festival a trial, what I call a trial against FPÖ, but together with the FPÖ. So it was a kind of a big discussion, a bit like the Moscow trials. And that's why in every morning I would sit with them in the cafe and discuss the trial that we would do in the afternoon with these politicians, because they are quite clever. And then I asked, but why do you use these fascist rhetorics? Yeah. And they said, yeah, but it's true, it's from Goebbels, that's true, but it's super effective and it sounds cool. And anyway, our voters, they don't remember it. No. So it's not fascism.
Which is the only truth they say.
Yeah.
They don't remember it.
Before the summer, I had composer George Friedrich Haas here, who wrote a book about his childhood in Austria. And he says he grew up in a family that was still large believers in the Nazi ideology. And he said it just never left. It has always remained there.
I'm sorry, I'm not from Austria. I'm from the eastern part of Switzerland. So to say Austria, I mean, I can really understand this kind of culture, which is a very different, strangely different culture, how, for example, Germany dealt with the Holocaust. Yeah. And in Austria, I'm staging now a play by Elfriede Jelinek, which is exactly talking about this, that in the end of the war, Austria decided that they were the victim of Hitler, and they never believed in the Holocaust, and they started a kind of anti-Semitism, conservative logic of telling the story. So you could have, everybody knew somebody who was a partisan. I mean, there were absolutely no partisans in Austria, for example. And I think you can do these kind of jokes I do now on every country who tries to kind of deal with a big perpetrator trauma. So it's a bit unfair. But I was always impressed how extremely, I don't know, how it is possible to really not learn at all from history besides some sentences that you just repeat in a ritual way. So that's for me, again, a big difference, because when you say, okay, the AfD is different from the western part of Germany, and the AfD comes mostly from the eastern part, and the eastern part didn't have this kind of reprogrammation of the German mind, because the Soviets were not so much interested in this. They said, okay, you were all anti-fascists, and all the fascists came from the western part of Germany, so I can understand. But Austria stays, I have to stay there a bit more to really understand why this change didn't happen so far. And I think this composer, I have to meet him because perhaps he knows. I don't.
No, I can imagine, but I find it interesting what you say. Can we learn from history, or are we not able to do that at all? And we were speaking about this as well. How it was also so that, and also the writer Nino Haratishvili, who was here, she said as well, she's from Georgia, and she said, I knew more about the Nazi regime than I knew about communism. It wasn't taught. So I wonder as well, is it that we cannot learn from it, or is it that we don't teach it enough? What do you think?
Well, in Slovakia, we definitely don't teach it enough. That is for sure. Young people, they don't know basically nothing about 68, which was a key year, and they don't know almost nothing about 89, which was the beginning of the new era, and a few years after the independent Slovakia was started to exist. So, yes, we teach about Nazi regimes, obviously not enough, and after we don't teach our kids.
What do you think?
I mean, there's this very known quote by, I think, a philosopher called Santayana. He's not read anymore, but he said, who doesn't know history repeats it. And I think who knows history repeats it. I really think the problem is that you teach, for example, fascism in a way, and you enclose it in a way in the past, that it is so horrible, and it is so enclosed in the eternal repetition of these 12 years, that you can't believe that it will ever break out of this cage. So you talk really about something that is not linked to what was before and what was after. And as you know, in Germany, it's even forbidden by law to compare, for example, the Holocaust by something else horrible which could happen, you know? Some other massacre or Holocaust. And this is very tragic that, for example, when you see in Austria, I had another trial against so-called leftist anti-Semitism, Palestina camps, etc., because it's forbidden by law to criticize, let's say, in a harsh way, Israel in Germany and Austria. And of course, we all understand why, and it makes absolutely sense. But tragically, it leads to support another massacre and another genocide. And I think all this, and I would not even say point on Austria or Germany or, I don't know, Slovakia or Russia or Hungary or the Netherlands. I think this is deeply human. And what we are asking ourselves here perhaps is democracy as a system able to fight the deeper streams of history? I mean, now I become a bit philosophical, but why is after 80 years of democracy or something like democracy in Western Europe, we are exposed to our traumas in an almost blind way? And you only have to be tourist in a country. I think in 5 years I will not see it anymore. But when you come to other countries, you always think, so wow, you know, they are in their way so blind, and then you adapt the blindness and you go on. And yeah, where is the system of education or of debate or of, you know, that this could be avoided? Because debates are just, I say you are fascist, and the other one says, yeah, but you are the fascist, and no, I am for freedom, no, I am for, I mean, what the fuck? So this system seems somewhere be a bit dysfunctional, I think. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to go on that level now because I think it goes too far, and I mean, it's too vague. But yeah, I sometimes ask myself, but how can we escape it?
Is that something that keeps you up at night as well?
Yes, very good question. I mean, I think what we see, I mean, what I noticed, for example, with my own students is that for a long time, whenever I said, oh, the EU was founded to avoid war, and it started out of the shatters of World War II, for a long time I really noticed that students were a bit bored by this story, you know, like, oh, yeah, we know, we have learned, etc. But that this really also changed in the wake of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that for many of my younger students, it was the first time that they realized, oh wow, this actually can happen also on the European continent. So I think what you say with this kind of telling history as something from the past, something that was so terrible that it will actually never happen again, makes it so unrealistic for younger people that they don't believe in it anymore. So I think that's one reason why we sometimes tend to repeat what we have actually had before. But the other thing is also that both these transitions to democracy, I mean, be it in Austria now or then much later in Eastern Europe, they went very, very fast, right? I mean, Austria in 45, the war was over. 55, it was became an independent state again, and then all these elites that had been there, they had to be replaced very, very quickly. But of course, they were still there. And if you, I just read a documentary about Kicker, so he's the leader of the Austrian FPÖ, of the far right, and he was born into a former Nazi family. And you could really see that also the way that he described it himself, that the legacy of this family just lived in him, you know. So he grew up in a household that was completely, in a way, told that they were not allowed to believe this anymore, that they were not allowed to exist in a way, but they still believed it, right? So they felt very much like the underdogs, kind of being told that, for example, they had to clean up for former concentration camp internees, and that was, of course, extremely humiliating for them. So in this family, this legacy of the Nazi ideas that just continued, and it was not shown outside. You know, nobody was allowed to talk about it or to use these words, but it just stays in these families. So I think this is something that we see in many European countries, that the legacy of authoritarian regimes and values that are attached to that, they're maybe not showing up in the public debate because they're silenced, but they still exist in the back of people's minds.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the liberation from the Nazis was in 45, and now it seems a bit by reusing these rhetorics, because Kickl is exactly, I mean, Kickl made a step, so to say, and he now reuses the terms, and the second liberation is the liberation that it is forbidden to be a Nazi, you know? It's a very strange, I mean, and that's my question, if we are exposed, and you described it so well in this example, when we are exposed to this kind of let's say, almost unconscious functioning as a culture, or as a cultural debate, how can we solve by democratic forces? Because we say, okay, when Kickl uses this sentence, he found out, or his demographics, that he has 30%. So what is democracy doing? Forbidding to use it? Or, I mean, what is the solution for it? Because he has the right to be, you know, to follow his trauma of his family. And this is the problem, because of course the other possibility is that you analyze it, and then out of this analysis you make a master plan, and then you follow it, and there are no votes, or votes for non-important bullshits, like I guess in the Eastern Bloc in the past, that you vote for something that doesn't count. And I mean, there I'm really a bit like, I feel sometimes that now that this kind of deep repetition comes back, that how do we go on with the whole system that is broken somehow?
I want to move on to that, because I think you're both really fighting for democracy and also trying to prevent that repetition from happening. But before, maybe one question a little bit off topic, but I do want to address it, because we are talking about, of course, them, or I say them, but it's like far-right parties being against the arts, but they're also, of course, very much against academia. And I wonder what you notice about it.
Sorry.
Don't worry. No, I think that's a very good question. I think in general, I mean, yeah, arts and academia have a lot in common in the way that they are not really attached to a lot of money, but they have other weapons, and these are words. I mean, Sadie Smith said words are weapons of mass destruction, and I think this is the reason why the far right and other autocratic politicians are always attacking the arts and academia. I mean, a very big example is, of course, again, Hungary with the CEU, the Central European University, which was really, or still is, a very much a big international institution. It was actually forced to move from Hungary to Austria, to Vienna, for political reasons, because it basically was not allowed to stay in Hungary anymore. And many other Hungarian institutions were attacked in a similar way. We have seen also extreme cases in Turkey with also lots of, academics trying to start their whole careers outside of Turkey because they couldn't work in Turkey anymore. So these are the extreme cases. But again, I think we should not be complacent. I think it starts very, in small steps. And again, this current government in the Netherlands has had the most drastic cuts to academic institutions or to academia in general in history, and it's also delegitimizing intellectualism, right? It says, especially social sciences and humanities, these are left-wing hobbies, and that's one step how you start, right? You kind of tell people that what universities do is not good, is not legitimate, and then in the next step, you might, you cut the money so they're less independent, and then at some point, maybe there are some political, moves towards, having some people being removed. But I mean, this is not happening yet. But I think it's small steps that can lead to that.
Do you also notice personally these attacks after you speak out about, for instance, the elections, or when you're in? You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but...
Yeah, so I do get some comments about it, yeah. Definitely. And I also noticed that I'm being asked not to use certain words by media, for example, because it might be too controversial.
So, now move on to the positive side, because I'm just kidding. It's very deep. All of it, of course, very depressing. But what I like also about, all of you, and is that you remain so hopeful and in such a fighting spirit as well. And Matej, what you have been doing ever since you were fired is truly incredible. You also think you're going to win it. So tell me, which I love. And I believe as well. So you got fired, and then you started uniting with everyone. Can you tell me about that process?
Many months before I got dismissed, there was a platform called Open Culture that was created in Slovakia. Their first act was that they put out a petition against the Minister of Culture, and they got 190,000 signatures, asking the minister to be so kind and step down from the position because she is incapable. It's very important to put this in correlation with the number of votes she got during the elections. She got around 30,000 votes to get into the parliament, and there we go with almost 200,000 people asking her to go away. Then they repeated the petition with basically the same success. And this platform, uniting people from the sector of culture, not only artists, but people working in the sector of culture and arts and creative industry, they were operating as an underground network. And so when I got dismissed, I was contacted by them very shortly after, basically one step back. I got dismissed. The director of the Slovak National Gallery wrote a Facebook status saying that she thinks it's wrong, and she got fired the day after.
Very brave of her.
Yes, she's a brave lady, and she's dismissed as well as I am now. And this provoked a press conference at the gallery where people came, expressed a lot of support to her and to me and to others that were dismissed before, but they were not as visible as us because they were from smaller institutions. But we were not the first directors dismissed without giving any logical reason. One of the reasons that they put in my concern was that I was a political activist. This is what Machala said, that the reason number one why Drlička has to go is that he's a political activist, which is, of course, a piece of crap. I never expressed my political views in public. So it's a complete lie, but that's all they do, they lie. And then I was contacted by the Open Culture, so I started to enter this community. And hard times always bring solidarity, or not always, but this time it brings a lot of solidarity. And so now we are very active. We work online, of course, because we are from all over the country. we presented the cultural strike as a exclamation mark, like we are ready to go to real strike, but for the moment it's just a state of preparation of the general strike of culture. Since less than 2 weeks, we have already 333 institutions that entered the strike awareness, we can call it, thousands of individuals, and it grows every day, so people are entering. Of course, the state institutions are frightened because this is the heritage of communism, is that, I don't want to speak for the other countries, I'm not an expert on history in other post-Soviet country, but I think there is a smart guy who said once that there were so many communists before 89 in Slovakia. Where did they all go? Well, they stayed, and they are still there, and they bring up children, and they continue with their with this mentality of communists, which is collaborating. You know, the mentality that was installed during 40 years of communism will not just go away so quickly. So it's deeply installed, and in the countryside it's even deeper, and it goes also on the younger generation. And one of the outcomes of this mentality is that we are afraid. We are afraid of speaking out. Because we were taught, like, if you speak up, well, if my parents would speak up, they would definitely lose their job, their children wouldn't go to university, and they could even finish in prison or in uranium mines. So, you know, heavy stuff, and this sort of state, like, people are afraid of talking. So I was trying to call my colleagues from the other state institutions saying, they will not stop. You are the next one. I mean, they will fire you also. And if they don't fire you next month, they will fire you after. So, like, step up, speak up. If we all get united, it will be impossible for them to stop us. But of course, it's more difficult than it seems. But still, even if the directors of the institutions don't enter the strike, their employees are entering the strike. So we see institutions blinking. We have, you can check it out, it's culturalstrike.sk, and they are blinking on the map of Slovakia, the institutions that are in the strike, and the numbers are different from city to city, but it's already over 90 cities, and as I said, more than 300 institutions. So this is a positive thing. Yes. It is very obvious that the entire cultural sector is not unhappy, but we are saying a big no to this minister and to Mr. Machala. I wouldn't like to be in their head. I cannot imagine waking up in the morning knowing that I'm governing a sector that hates me and has no respect for me, and basically everything I do is immediately shut down by arguments, because whatever they do, we say, well, it's wrong because this and this. We give immediately arguments. This is how we communicate. They put out a bunch of lies during their press. It's not really conferences, they just meet with the press and they don't accept any questions, and then they leave. And then Open Culture platform, we publish reactions to their lies, and we explain. So I don't think this will become like a huge national movement, but I think, and what I am observing, is that this culture movement, and I'm very thankful to Milo and other people who immediately joined in, and the international press, international media started to inform in other countries what's happening. And what is happening, so the cultural sector is uniting, it's speaking very clearly, without any aggression, without any negative energy, just saying that every single action of the ministry is incompetent and is bringing just destruction, nothing else. It's not only about Bratislava and the elite institutions, it's also about the traditional culture. By the way, the minister, she went to 2 folkloric traditional art festivals and she got whistled out.
Really?
Yeah, she came and people told her immediately, you are not welcome here. So, because she comes in these ridiculous pseudo-folkloric outfits, which are just ridiculous, and it's insulting the people who are really experts on traditional culture. So I think this is positive, and we see a larger movement now going on in the state departments because of the debt that Slovakia has. If we want to receive more European money, we have to make certain adjustments in our budgeting, and we are far from achieving it. So there will be no raises of wages in the public sector. And there is another debate of a general strike, but not in culture, but of a general strike in the country, because of major unhappiness of people with their wages. So, okay, we are fighting for bigger ideas, and we are fighting for the freedom of speech. They are fighting for their wages, but at one moment it will all be united, I think, in a major movement. So our goal is of the open culture. We are strictly apolitical. We don't mix with any political parties in opposition, coalition. We don't accept politicians to enter our meetings. We don't go on stages when they have their activities. We are absolutely apolitical, and we just ask the government and the Prime Minister Fico to change the Minister of Culture to someone with whom we can have a decent dialogue about how to fix what they broke and how to continue in the fields of culture. So we remain in the fields of culture. We don't express our opinions on general politics.
And why? Because of course they would want you to join them.
Yes, but we don't feel to be experts enough to comment. Of course, we have a lot of needless to say, in the open culture, there are people who are more to left, more to the right. So we are definitely not absolutely united on general ideas about Palestine, about Israel, about Russia, about Ukraine. So we decided to focus on what we are sure and where we are united, which is the freedom of arts, and not demolishing all the functioning systems of funding, etc. And I think if we want to achieve something, we have to stay out of politics and we have to stay out of the other subjects. It might seem to be selfish, or maybe it looks like a mistake from far, but I think it's the only way we can move further. And for the moment, it's functioning very well. But we are ready to hand on the torch to the others. So on Monday, we have a press conference with some new facts about what's happening in the ministry. It's going to be extremely interesting, I believe, because it's outrageous what's happening in the ministry. So eyewitnesses of the craziness that's going on there. And then on Thursday, protests in more than 10 cities in Bratislava now. In Slovakia, sorry.
It sounds also like one really clear and not super hard demand: move away from this the dismissal of this Minister of Culture. And then I say Fico, but that's wrong. It's Fico, right? Fico. But so far he has been really protecting her and standing behind her. Do you think he'll cease in the end? He has to.
As I said before, if they were like changing the face of Slovak culture, if they explain what is the goal, and even without saying how they will achieve, but this is the goal where we want the culture to be, then it would be a different situation. But they are just destroying without showing any precise goal, and we see really just fire and smoke behind them. I don't want to go into details, but basically the entire infrastructure, which was very fragile because we are a very young country, the infrastructure had imperfections, of course, in terms of funding and laws, etc. But it was the quality and the functioning itself was going up. It had the right direction. Now it just crashes down, and even if the Prime Minister ignores this fact. I am not sure if he will be able to ignore the fact that the ministry itself, they fired 40% of the employees of the ministry, 40%.
That's a lot.
They fired, for example, the Institution of Cultural Politics that was established 10-ish years ago, and their role was to gather data so that the ministry is finally data-driven, and we know how many spectators go to this gallery, from basic data, like I just mentioned, to something more subtle. So they were cancelled from one day to another, and they continue by firing more and more people. And from what remained now, half of the employees are in strike inside of the ministry, and tomorrow, if there are no floods in Bratislava, if there are, we will do it later. we will talk about the mobbing, the aggressivity of Machala and the top management of the ministry towards the employees. They are breaking the law while firing the people. Like they don't even apply the basic work, the labor law rules to the dismissals. Then we will show the proofs how the dotation, the grant scheme supporting reconstructions of the heritage is completely ruined. Like there will be no money will be invested this year to the infrastructure of the heritage, so castles and churches, etc.
So they lied about that.
Sorry?
They lie about that.
Yeah,
because they always say they're going to not this modernist things or
exactly.
this postmodernist thing you do, but we're going to repair all the beautiful old buildings.
One of the first things the minister became famous for, Minister Šimkovičová, on Facebook she asked, "My dears, do you prefer that the Ministry of Culture supports the LGBTQ activities or that we fix the castles and the churches?" Simple question. So her fans said, of course, the churches, of course. Well, none are reconstructed.
Not even doing that.
The entire grant scheme, the entire funding of financing just collapsed, just crashed. We're in September. We don't even have the results of the expert juries because she fired the experts from the juries. They hired. I don't want to go into details. As I said, everything they touch changes into a mess, and so it's not that they are pushing away the intellectuals and the cultural elite, and they are supporting the traditional art. They are not doing that. If they were doing it, if they were successful, then it would be trickier. But basically, they are making upset and very angry the people that are in the folklore, in the traditional arts, and also in the so-called elitist fields of culture. So, yeah, they are barbarians, absolute barbarians, and everybody starts to see. So, just to answer very clearly, I think that even if the Prime Minister and the government will be ignoring our demands, they cannot ignore that the ministry will fall apart as an institution.
And it might be a small silver lining. That they're so incapable.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just stupid, and maybe that's the goal. No Ministry of Culture. Yeah. There are many people thinking that that's the goal.
Yeah.
Ministry of Culture. We need the Ministry of Propaganda, and for that you don't need 200 people.
The juries and the stuff.
Yeah. But I'm going too far now.
Maybe as a last question to you as well, Milo, because you just finished in June the Council of the Republic, for instance, at Festwochen, at the Wiener Festwochen, and you've been working, of course, for a very long time in resistance and in revolution and creating performances about this. What are you trying to do there? Because I think one of the things you also really shook up in the Festwochen was that you tried to create also a sort of a new democratic movement. It's very political what you did there.
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps I also had you could say, a partly destructive role when I entered my institution, the Wiener Festwochen, a year ago, because I had the impression that, I can understand these arguments. It's elitist. Who decides on who is invited, and why is it only a little group of curators? And can the people that finances this not have a say in it, and so on? So that's a bit the reason why I created the council. It's the biggest festival we have, the crossover festival we have in Europe. And I said, it's interesting. I arrive, I'm the artistic director, and they say, Milo, now you decide on everything. If you don't want to have theater, only music, we do it. And I said, okay, guys, this is strange. It shouldn't be like this, because I'm a public servant. And that was a bit my approach to say, of course, I completely believe that there is, for example, a jury who can decide what is the best in the arts, and there are quality standards. But I think there is also, especially in art, a lot of things that should be democratically kind of opened, or at least transparent, how the decisions are made. And that's why I introduced this council, which is a very local council, but also an international council, to bring a bit together the different levels. And I think this brings me to resistance, making this that people is really kind of like somebody comes to this concert, just a populist idiot with a absurd costume, and they whistle because they are proud of it, and they have it in their hands, and it's their festival, you know? And they don't want that it is taken away by crazy populists. And I think the same is when the FPÖ will try, I mean, they mix a bit the levels because they want to give the money of the festival, which is funded by the nation and the city, to the communities. It will not work because it's democratically impossible. But if they will try to close it, I think we will have much more resistance now than a year ago, because the basis of this festival is bigger. And I think that's super important. And when we come to the European Union, of course, the solution is more democracy, is more participation, is more transparency. And I think there it comes, of course, to a little self-critique, because we are now criticizing everybody besides ourselves or myself. And then it was interesting for me to see how you can resist by opening institutions.
Maybe as a last question, because I find this very interesting, and I find it's also a bit of a dilemma, because you said as well that you're doing these trials, and then you speak with the politicians of the FPÖ, and so in a way you do, would you say you work with them? Let me put it in a bigger way. Some artists or people from the field of culture think you should not work with, so you should really boycott everyone who is more right than the middle. And I wonder what you...
I don't agree at all.
Why not?
I think there is a red line. There's racism, there's real anti-Semitism, not only a word, but existing. And I think by pointing on people and saying you are fascist, you are racist, you are anti-Semite, I don't talk to you, you destroy the concept of anti-Semitism, of racism, and so on. And I think we have to be very balanced in where we draw the line of democracy. But we have also to be very decisive when you say this, we will not accept this. You crossed the line, I will not accept it. For example, if I have an FPÖ guy and he will deny the Holocaust or he will make one racist joke, then my debates in the cafe house are over, and that's it. And I think for me it's very simple. And the rest for me is projection. And of course, if somebody says, I will not come to this trial, if this person is there, then I will say, okay, if this is your decision, then we have to see how we solve it. That's it. So I'm kind of the organizer, and I have to accept these sensitivities, and I will, as I'm a curator, and I'm not, I don't know. I mean, perhaps it's also, as you say, an utopia and a dilemma, this kind of Habermas-like space of discussion, and you know. So I know that very well, but I still believe in it. I try, and I think that's what we do in the arts. You know, a bit what he said. Yeah. He defends art as a, in my opinion, very political space, because it's not the politics of the parties. But we defend this exact space, and I know it's not a quote by Voltaire, but he said, I will defend your right to say something that I completely hate, you know? So that's what it is.
Thank you very much for this. I very much appreciate it. And I'm going to see if there's any questions. Is there someone who wants to join in and ask something? Ja, kom naar je toe.
Thanks for this very engaging debate conversation. Maybe this is a very weird association, but when you were talking about how to make sure that history does not repeat itself, grappling with these kind of broader philosophical questions, and also when you were talking about that sometimes when the far right tries to break down democracy, it's maybe too absurd to accept it. I also had to think of, 89 and the end of history that was proclaimed by Francis Fukuyama. And of course, since the early 2000s, there have been many, many people writing about, no, of course, there's not this end of history, and we see new kind of conflicts on the European continent. But the past couple of years, I've begun thinking like, but is it not still the case that some people get stuck in this idea that there is still this feeling that we have sort of this end of history, in the sense that people still, maybe not exactly in the way that Fukuyama intended it, but still believe that liberal democracy is just too strong to be broken down, and there is this kind of end of history that we still live in, even though there are wars on the European continent. So I was wondering if some of you would be able to relate to that or reflect on it.
Yeah, I have the impression it's for you. I just had one association that, and perhaps you know that too, that before the First World War break out, there was a bestseller proving why a war, international war, is not possible anymore. And this was 1913. Because, I don't know, the links, the economical links, and the transnational market, and blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, yeah, that's my association.
No, I think I very much agree with what you say. I think there is really a danger that we are too complacent, that we think our democracies are strong enough, and that any kind of, illiberal system is unrealistic. So I think, and that's why I repeatedly said there are small steps. I think we are still in a society where a lot is possible, where there's more freedoms than ever, maybe. But at the same time, I think it can go very, very quickly, and we have seen it also in highly advanced democracies that have moved quite, back. And you just have to think of the United States under Trump. I mean, nobody would have expected that 20 years ago or 10 years ago, but it is a possibility, and we need to be very careful about it.
Is there anyone else who? Yes, kom naar u toe en daarvoor.
Thank you very much. My association, going on the same topic, was what Walter Benjamin said, that the history is always the history of the, well, I can only say it in German. You translate it for me. Die herrschende Geschichte ist immer die Geschichte der Herrschenden. So
it's a Marx quote, I think.
Yeah, it's a quote of Marx, actually. But he works on it in his historical thesis. And I think that is also an answer why the history told is confined in a certain space and in a certain time, because there are interests. And we have to see who really did win the Second World War. Was it really democracy? Or were there other interests at play? What I want to say is that I think when we talk about liberal democracy, we cannot do so without also thinking about the free market economy and how those two are hooked up. And I think that the way our capitalist system developed really could be the end of democracy. So I'm not so sure we're still really in a democratic society. So I'm interested to hear you on that. And if we do democracy, it should be democracy within society, not only at a political level, but really participation in all levels of society, and we don't have that anymore.
When there was the first deconstruction of culture in the 80s, 90s, the first neoliberal trying to, I mean, now I'm talking about Western Europe, trying to destroy the big institution to make the same work, not with 50 people, but by 5, with no contract, So the neoliberalism we remember, perhaps. And it didn't work, and you had to reconstruct with a lot of money everything towards the end of the century, in the 0 years. And when this started again, and also here, by the way, in Belgium, when I was still in the NT Ghent, I was working very long here, so and when they started again, the right-wing parties to do the same, I was like, but it doesn't make sense. And then there was a survey, and the economical survey proved that €1 that you put in the arts creates €8, So And this was even not an argument. And then I understood, okay, now there's a political will. Now there's a will to destroy, you know, and I don't even understand it. We called it Kafkaesque. It happens and nobody really knows why it happens, and we can't even believe it because it's a bit nightmarish and it's not real. And this is for me, that's why I said a bit, I know it sounds a bit Cassandra style to say, okay, we are in the end of the democratic age. But we are a bit in the end of the age of a kind of a rational discourse who somebody says this and the other one brings a better fact and then, sorry, I was mistaken, you know? And this doesn't count anymore. And that's the point that makes me so... And I mean, it was a kind of a Kafkaesque poem that you were doing, telling what they all destroyed. So they want to not save the queer culture, but then the churches, but then they don't save the churches, then they put a costume, they go there, they are whistled. I mean, it's come on, what is it? I have no answer to it. And yeah, so, and I think, of course, the Marx approach, the Walter Benjamin, I don't know less, but is very structural, is very that there is a reason all behind it. But I have to confess that I don't see it anymore. I mean, that doesn't mean a lot, that if I don't see it, perhaps you see it, or you, but I don't.
I don't feel I have enough knowledge, and I'm in the geopolitics of the general space of European countries to answer or to develop what you said. But I think it's very important, especially when people from Eastern Europe, because we are still Eastern Europe, are in discussions, such as I am now, is that we don't have the same departure station. And I don't think the perception of capitalism is the same in Germany than it's in Slovakia. And intellectuals in our country don't consider us democracy, but plutocracy. We are very money-driven. A lot of wealth is built on oligarchic capital. So the principles are trying to be applied to all countries in the same way, but it's impossible because the texture of the countries is very different. And one of the main problems is the history. European space is shared by countries with very different history and very different points of getting on the train of democracy. And it is obvious that, well, we are behind. Mentally, we are behind. And it's impossible to jump in space and time just by having 1 or 2 generations of people going to study abroad, like I did, to see how the world outside of our country can function, to suddenly to see that people are thinking differently and they have other red lines in their lives, like, okay, in Slovakia during communism there was a saying, I will not translate it correctly, but basically what it was saying, like, if you don't steal, you steal from your family. And people were laughing when we were saying it, and it was like, haha, so if it's not on chain, you just take it and you take it home, because if you don't take it, somebody else will take it. And this is deeply in our culture, and if anybody from the coalition is watching this stream, there is a police car waiting at the Švehad airport. And so the younger generation is, especially those who travel and those who read, they have a different perception. But we can't make this quantum jump in such a short time. So we perceive it differently, and we want everything now. You know, like I think the young countries that like Slovakia, I think we are the youngest country in the European Union. We want everything extremely quickly. Young people want everything extremely quickly. And I know this is a thing that's all around Europe, but in Slovakia it's even quicker. Like, because Bratislava is very close to Austria, close to Vienna. I think they are the closest capitals in the world.
Yes.
And it's not so easy, you know. Away, huh? It's not so easy because people want the same. Like, come on, it's just Danube, and look what they have. Why can't we have that? Because we are also in European Union. So it's very complex. But I speak too much. Your question should be also more you should also be separating the country that make the European Union. We entered the European Union for the ideas of peace that should be secured by business interactions. You know, that was the plan. We see that there is no guarantee for that, but you should also study the mentality of each country. So I think Slovakia is trying very hard to be a democratic country, and I think we still have a long way to go. But on the other hand, I lived in France for 8 years, and I believe France is a democratic country still, you know. My perception as a Slovak living there, and again, you have to imagine or understand what kind of sets of ideas and knowledge I brought with me to France, you know. So it's very relative. It's impossible to take European Union as a bloc that has one state of mind. It's not like that. So it's extremely difficult to come to commune decisions.
I'm going over in the front. I was thinking you had a... Is it... Okay, it's the last question.
Thank you. Just a little context. I'm also from Slovakia, so it's a very personal theme to me, and thank you very much for speaking up. I'm just going to have a short question because I don't want to make a lecture, but did we become too soft?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's good. I think it's good to be soft. Let's kill them with love.
That's a beautiful final answer, I think. Maybe to to round up, if people had listened or watched the live stream and they think so, we want to spread more awareness. Can you maybe say one more time where they can go and where they can follow everything that you are doing?
Okay, so maybe we can sort of publish it around the Balie also.
Yes.
So there is a website called Kulturny Strike, which means culturestrike.sk, where you can, it's very simple, you can just follow how the number of engaged companies and private people raise, and I don't know if there is English version, but we are preparing because there is a lot of attention of international medias. Yeah, so that's one moment, and any international support is very, very important for us. So thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for all you are doing for this cause. And I think we will be very soon all in the same or very similar situation, and the solidarity of culture, which is now happening in Slovakia, I think might become a European solidarity of culture. So I think it's a good sign.
Oh, I'm very thankful that you were willing to come all the way to Amsterdam, and thank you all for participating, and thank you for being here, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.